Hey guys, so we are going to make our bechamel and turn that into macaroni and cheese. So on the stove, I've got a pot of just plain water that has some salt and a little bit of olive oil in it, which you can use vegetable oil or anything else, and I'm letting that come to a boil. Back here, I've got 2 cups of milk, and I've put a clove and a bay leaf in it, and we're gonna add some onion. And what that's gonna do is we're gonna add just a small part of the onion that I've cut. Here's all the trash and everything else. I'm only gonna use a half an onion, and I'm gonna place this right into this milk. And what we're gonna do is we're gonna scald that milk. And what that means is we're gonna bring it up slowly in heat, and we're going to let it start to warm so it doesn't curdle when it hits this pan when we make our cheese sauce. So in here is 2 cups of milk, a bay leaf, a little bit of clove, and an onion, and essentially what that's going to be is called an onion picante. And that is going to be the flavor that's hidden behind your sauce. So water is boiling, this is coming up, I've got it set, I don't know if Landon can see that or not, that is set on low, so that's going to slowly bring up. So who can tell me how to make a roux? I'll give you a couple seconds to answer that. 2 parts flour to 2 parts fat. So we're gonna do 2 tablespoons of butter. It's marked across here. You've got a tablespoon, a tablespoon, a tablespoon, tablespoon. So I'm going to throw 2 tablespoons, 1, 2, of butter into this pan. And I'm gonna turn on some heat. I'm gonna turn that to a medium-low. And this is starting to boil, which is great, which means we're gonna add our macaroni noodles. So I got jumbo elbow noodles because I like jumbo elbow noodles, but you can use any kind of pasta. You can use bow ties, you can use penne, you can use elbows, ruffles, anything like that. So my water's boiling. We're just gonna dump this straight in. And we're gonna let that cook for about 7 minutes. All right, so our butter is melting, so it's 2 parts butter or fat to 2 parts flour. So I've got my flour and everything else over here. And these are gonna be the rest of the ingredients that you need. So here's my flour, I've got my cheese, we've got our milk that we're making on the stove, and a little bit of yellow mustard. And that's really all you need to make macaroni and cheese. Not much, very simple, super yummy, lots of flavor. So we're gonna try to get this butter melting pretty quickly. I'm just gonna throw it around in my pan so the pan is all nice and melty. Can you see down in there, buddy? All right, so we're gonna try to get that butter melted nice and quick. I'm just trying to coat the pan with it and doing it fast so it melts faster. There we go, we're starting to get there. All right, so our butter is just about all melted. And we're gonna let that get nice and warm. Remember, we don't want to brown our butter because then we're gonna end up making more of a blonde sauce versus, or even a brown sauce. So we wanna make sure that we're not browning our butter. We're gonna keep this nice and basic, nice blonde roux, so that way we can make our bechamel. So I'm gonna grab my flour. Flour. You can use any kind of flour you got. And 2 tablespoons. So 2 tablespoons of butter, 2 tablespoons of flour. We're starting to get some bubbles in here. You can see. So I'm going to just sprinkle my flour in here. All right, so we've got 2 tablespoons of flour. Now is when I recommend that you use a whisk. So that way you're cooking your flour and that you're getting all those clumps out and you're working it out. So you can see that it's clumping up very nicely. And it's thickening. And that's honestly not quite enough. So this is where it gets tricky. is so you're just gonna kind of sprinkle a little more flour in there. And you're just wanting to get all the butter kind of soaked up, because you want it thick like a paste, but not really runny. So you can see how it's starting to clump and how it's getting thick, and we're getting our nice little bubbles here. All right, so we're gonna let that cook for just a few minutes because we want the flour to cook. And I wanna make sure that that's the thickness that I want. So it almost looks like a gravy at this point. And you can actually, I want that a little thicker still. I'll show you the consistency we're after. So you're just gonna kind of really watch your flour here. And we're getting our bubbles, there we go. See how it took every bit of that and it made it into like this big old clump? That's what you want. You want it super thick, and you want it to be able to stick to whatever it is. And you don't want runny butter. All right, so we're gonna let that cook. We're gonna bring our temperature down just a little bit because yet again, we wanna keep this blonde. We don't want it to brown, but we're wanting to cook our flour here. So we're gonna check back here and see if our milk is getting hot. So I'm gonna bring my heat up just a little bit, trying to scald this milk a little quicker. And we're gonna remove this from heat for just a minute because our scalded milk is not quite hot enough yet. So you can see we're getting some steam out of here. It's all right, buddy, he's helping me. Yes.
Can we fix the Xbox?
We will try later. All right, so we're scalding our milk. What we're doing is we're just bringing it up to a nice temperature. And I'm going to actually vent this a little more. And we're trying to flavor our milk. That's what the bay leaf and the clove and everything else is in here. And you can see, once I move this away from heat, how thick and kind of clammy that got. That is perfect. So you don't want to boil your milk, but you definitely want it to get nice and hot, because otherwise it hits that hot pan and it'll curdle, and then you've got something really gross.
One plug is unplugged.
Just leave it alone for a little bit. All right, so I can feel some heat back here. I'm trying to get it. You know what? We're gonna switch eyes because this eye is a lot hotter and a lot faster. So let's just cut that off, and we're gonna bring that up to a nice steady heat. So Coach Elizabeth's son is helping me film today, and we are making mac and cheese. So that's just starting to get warm. So it won't be much longer until it's actually scalded. What will happen is you'll see some bubbles start to rise, and it'll get almost kind of frothy looking. But yet again, you don't want it to boil. And the point of the bay leaf and the clove is to infuse that milk so it gives it a little bit of extra flavor. There'll be some undertones in your mac and cheese. All right, so we're getting there. It's getting warm. Let's see, we can put a thermometer in it, and that way we can see just how hot it's getting. All right, so we're at about 116 degrees, 115, thereabouts. So we're getting there. It won't be much longer. You can actually see the steam starting to rise. And we're just gonna stir because you don't want it to burn either. And you want to make sure you're mixing in all those flavors. I should have scalded the milk first because it does take a little longer than the actual roux, but I wanted to show you guys all of this. So we got some nice steam. And another minute or two and this will be perfect to start adding into our basic blonde roux to start our bechamel. temperature one more time to 130, 140. All right, you can actually hear it now too. It's starting to get closer to its boiling point. So we're just going to keep stirring that around and watching that steam. All right, so we're going to turn our heat back down really low. And our milk is scalded, which means it's warm. And we're going to start pouring this into our roux. And we're going to just start mixing that in with the whisk. As you can see, it's bubbling way too hot. So you saw how that thickened so quickly. So we're just going to try to move that away from the heat some because it's really hot. Landon, I'm going to come right here, okay? And we're going to add some more of our liquid in because that is still way too thick. So you're just going to keep adding liquid until it's about the same consistency as what it was, a little thick. But you're going to remember, as it cooks and comes to a boil, which is what you want it to do, it will continue to thicken. So we're just going to work out our clumps here. All right, that's turning into a beautiful sauce. Beautiful, beautiful sauce here, guys. All right, so we want it to come back to a little bit of a boil. And I'm going to add just a little more milk. And remember that I'm not actually pouring the onion or the bay leaf or anything else into it. And we're going to add extra liquid to that just because we're going to add cheese and everything else to it, so it's okay if it's a little runny. But I've got a nice smooth sauce here. We're going to let that come back up to a boil, and we'll be ready to add our cheese. I'm going to add a little bit of fresh cracked pepper to this because we know that we're at the consistency that we want it to be. So just a couple little shakes of fresh ground pepper, a little salt, just a little. A little salt goes a long way, and your cheese is salty. So, and your butter's kind of salty too. Looks really good. All right, so we're just gonna kind of whisk that in. Oh, yum! Oh, it smells good too. All right, so we're gonna bring our heat up just a little bit because you want it to come back to a boil once you get all of your liquid added to it, because it's going to continue the cooking of the flour and it's going to pull it all together. And you're just going to keep stirring because you don't want it to burn and you don't want it to stick. And you can leave it at this. You can add white cheeses and stuff to it and make a simple Alfredo. Like Parmesan and Romano and a little bit of mozzarella, and you're essentially going to have a Alfredo sauce. It's very rich. You may want to add more milk to that to keep it at this close to this consistency, or you can add several different cheeses to it, and you'll make your base for your macaroni and cheese. Maybe you want to turn it into a soup, so you could add more liquid. You could add, like, have your parents and stuff, and you can make beer cheese soup, like what we talked about in one of those videos, which is one of my favorite things ever. All right, so we're getting some really good steam, which means it's getting really close to being able to boil again, which is what we want. We want it to let it boil for about a minute to a minute and a half, and that will be about the thickness and the cooked of the flour that we want. I'm gonna check on our noodles over here. They are getting close to being done. So I'm actually just gonna cut off my heat and just leave the lid on it, and they will finish that cooking process. All right, see, now we're getting some bubbles. I don't know, Landon, if you can see, if you get way down in here, see these little bubbles and it's starting to move? That is perfect. So we're gonna wanna stir. And you can actually feel it give you some resistance on the pan. All right. So at this point, you pretty much have gravy. If you let this thicken a little more, you've got your plain white gravy. And then that's when you want to add your other stuff to it to make more of your sauces. So now you know how to make gravy. And you're gonna know how to make cheese sauce. All right, so that's actually thickening, and you can feel it resist against your whisk, which we'll get more bubbles and we'll be good. So I'm gonna let this continue to bubble for just a second, which there it goes, you can see really nice. And we're gonna bring our cheese and our mustard over here. All right, so you can see our bubbles and it's thickening very nicely. And just keep whisking. All right, now we can turn it back down to low because it's come back to a small boil, a real low simmer. And here comes the best part, the cheese. All right, so we got some cheese. So I'm adding, that's pretty close to about 2.5 cups. I'm using what I had in my fridge. You can use any kind of cheese you want to, guys. That's what's so cool about any sauce, is you make it what you want it to be. All right, so we're gonna start folding in that cheese and letting it melt. And we turned our heat down nice and low. Yeah, that's a beautiful thickness right there. It's giving a nice orange color to it. And then here's your secret ingredient, a little bit of mustard. About 1/2 teaspoon of yellow mustard. Well, about a teaspoon. And you're just gonna fold that in. Oh, excuse me, nope, false alarm, thought I had a sneeze. All right, and that is your cheese sauce, guys. So any chef will tell you to taste, taste, taste. So at this point, it's gonna be very hot. Taste it. Tastes pretty good. I think it needs a little more pepper. I can't quite taste the undertones of the mustard, so I may add a little more. I'm actually gonna cut my heat completely off because this is nice and hot still. I'm gonna add a little bit of garlic because I want it to have a little extra flavor. So we're gonna add just a little bit of garlic. That was probably about 1/2 teaspoon of garlic that I threw in there. And we're just gonna fold that in. Yum. All right. That tastes perfect to me. So I'm gonna drain my noodles because they're done. Throw this here. Let me grab a colander real fast there, bud, from above your head. So I'm gonna drain my noodles and I'm gonna put them right back in this pot. Oops. And I'm gonna sling them everywhere because I don't have as much control on my hand as I like to have. So I'm not draining off all the water because the pasta water has all that starch in it, and that's gonna give it some more of a creamy flavor. So our heat is still off, so that's not gonna make much of a difference. And then I'm gonna grab my wooden spoon back, and we're gonna just pour this right into our macaroni and cheese, into our pasta noodles here. Now you can choose to bake this if you want to. You can throw it in the oven for a while and bake it, or if you want super creamy cheese, like mac and cheese, you can leave it the way it is or add some more milk to it. but you're just gonna fold that right in to your noodles. And like I said, you can bake it. You can put cornflakes on it and bake it, or breadcrumbs. You can put buffalo chicken. You can put barbecue, like barbecue pork. You can eat it just the way it is. There's so many great options with macaroni and cheese. I'm gonna put some in a bowl so you can see just how delicious it is. And at this point too, you may want to taste it and see if it needs anything else. You may be like, oh, there's not quite enough cheese, or maybe I want some more salt and pepper, or maybe I need some garlic. So here is our delicious mac and cheese. Yum! All right, so let's taste it and see if we need to add anything to it before we finish it. Oh man, that was perfect. That is perfect. Landon, do you want to be my official taste tester?
Yeah.
He's like, yeah. We'll switch. So it's gonna be really hot, so you're gonna want to blow. Really hot.
Mmm.
Is it good?
Yeah.
Awesome. So that's our homemade mac and cheese.